Welcome to our session today designed to introduce you to the concept of geographical indications into the food and beverage ecosystem in Atlantic Canada. We're really excited to present the session today, which is brought to you by the European Union and Food and Beverage Atlantic. My name is Peter Chapman, and I'll be the moderator for the session today, and really excited about the content that we're going to share. It's a lot of interesting different topics that we're going to approach. And we're going to have the session recorded so that people will be able to access that recording at a later time. And we'll probably be about 45 minutes with our three speakers that we have for you today. And we're excited to hear the great content that each one of them are going to share. Traduction en français est disponible en audio. Suivez le lien présent dans le chat de l'événement. So if you're looking for French translation, you can access that through the link in the chat. And we are also going to have some great discussion, question and answer with our speakers following the session. So if you're interested, and we really invite you to remain and be a part of that question and answer period, I'm sure that you'll have a lot of things that you want to ask and specific questions. So there will be a link in the chat where you can join one of two breakout rooms that we've set up following the session with our speakers. So we really encourage you to join us there. As I said, my name is Peter Chapman, and I am really excited about the content today. I've worked my entire career in the food industry, started working at a grocery store when I was in high school, and spent about 20 years with Loblaw companies in different departments. And then for the last 13 years, I've had the privilege of working with different producers and processors across Canada and speaking at events in the food industry. And the concept of geographical indications, I think, is really interesting, and one that we really should learn more about and understand what the benefits of something like this could be. And if I'm 100% honest with you, when I was approached about moderating the session today, I really had to do some research of my own to make sure that I understood the topic properly. And so I'm interested to hear what each of our speakers have to say. We've got three great speakers today. We have Matthew Gorton, Marcia Cadogan, and Marta Middlebrough, and I'll introduce each of our speakers as we move through the program. And so today we're going to talk about geographical indications as a policy tool for sustainable economic development in Atlantic Canada. And we're going to focus on explaining what this concept is all about, the impact here in Atlantic Canada and across Canada, and then also just some of the relationships between geographical indications and rural development. So a lot of really great things to cover as we move through the program. So what I'd like to do is introduce our first speaker, and we're welcoming him all the way from the UK today. So I'd like to introduce you to Matthew Gorton. And Matthew's going to give us a presentation on the concept of geographical indications, really an introduction from the European perspective. And Matthew Gorton is a professor of marketing at Newcastle University Business School based in Newcastle upon Tyne in the UK. And he's also the coordinator of the EU Horizon 2020 project Strength to Food. And Strength to Food looks at the economic, social, and environmental impacts of geographical indicacations, as well as the public sector food procurement and short food supply chains. And Matthew has a background in agricultural economics and food marketing. So really looking forward to Matthew's introduction into this concept. So Matthew, I'll turn it over to you, and I will be back after your presentation.
Thank you, Peter. And hello from a very wet and windy Newcastle in the northeast of England. The presentation which I give today was prepared with colleagues from the Strength to Food project. And we were given a brief to introduce what are GIs, why have they been embraced by producers and policymakers, to think about some of the opportunities and challenges which are faced, and finally to think about the relationship between GIs and rural development. So let's try and work through those questions in turn. So what are geographical indications? Well, they're a form of intellectual property protection. So an indication is an identification of a good as originating from a particular territory where there is some form of quality, reputation, or other characteristic which is attributable to its geographical origin. A protected geographical indication would typically emerge by a group of producers coming together and collectively agreeing a code of practice. And the code of practice would specify the production process for the good, the nature of its qualities, and the geographical boundaries of the production area. And that code of practice would be submitted to a relevant authority for deliberation on whether it should be protected or not. If the application is successful, then only those goods which have been made in the production area according to the code of practice may bear the GI name. Now, without protection, a GI becomes generic. So it could be that producers anywhere in the world could produce under that geographical indication. For example, in the UK, the majority of regional cheeses are generic. So cheeses like Red Leicester or Double Gloucester can be produced anywhere. They don't have to be produced in Leicestershire or Gloucestershire. And consequently, there have been lots of imitation and copycat versions of the cheeses, which have over time weakened their renown and their quality. The EU has two systems for protecting geographical indications. Protected Designation of Origin, or PDO, has the strongest links to place. So to qualify as a PDO, the good must be produced, processed and prepared within the same geographical location using local raw materials. So for example, Parmigiano Reggiano cheese is not only that the cheese is produced in the Parma and Reggio Emilia territories, but also the milk which is used for manufacturing the cheese is also procured from those territories. Protected geographical indication is less strict in that only at least one of the stages of production, processing or preparation must take place in the region. So for example, Gyulai kolbas, which is a form of salami from a town in Hungary called Gyula, there the salami must be manufactured within Gyula according to a traditional recipe, but the pigs which are reared for the salami, they can come from outside of Békésmegye, the local area. When we think about geographical indications, it's important to recognize that they come in lots of different shapes and sizes. So some GIs are established, mature systems where there are a set of producers which have well-established relationships, good sales channels, international renown, and a good market presence. So Parma ham would be a classic example of that. Whereas there are other GIs which maybe have been more recently established, which are more small scale, that the producer relationships are more recent, that their reputation tends to be more localized, and they may not have access to international markets. Beyond the rationale for GIs based on intellectual property protection, there are a number of claims about what GIs can do. So for example, some people claim that GIs can help producers earn better returns. GIs may also help consumers to distinguish quality products. And finally, GIs may help with rural development. A key question to ask, however, is to what extent does the reality match the rhetoric on those three arguments? I'd like to go through now some of the evidence from the Strength to Food project on those three objectives for GIs. So thinking about the first one, about the ability to help producers gain stronger returns to their products, we investigated a number of cases of GIs, both PDO and PGI. And we looked at what was the nature of the prices and the margins achieved compared against comparable products, so comparable non-GI products produced. And what we found is that the GI production was achieving higher prices and better gross margins for producers. That was geographically spread, so there were GIs, for example, in Thailand and Vietnam, which were earning higher returns to producers compared against the reference products. GIs may also lower price volatility in retail markets, and there is evidence based on trade data that GIs aid trade flows and also unit export values. So they're a way of distinguishing foods based on quality and avoiding commodity markets, which may be very price sensitive and price driven. However, it's important to note that many GIs are not exported and remain small scale. So as yet, they're not reaping the gains from trade. What about our second arguments, then about GIs helping consumers to distinguish quality products? What our consumer evidence tells us is that consumers are looking for the quality and the principles underpinning GIs. So increasingly consumers are looking for provenance, they're interested in traditional foods and foods which are associated with particular regions. However, consumers' recognition of PDO and PGI logos are limited. So within Europe, only around 14% of consumers recognize PDO logo. For PGI, it's a little bit better, but still only 20%. We also asked consumers whether they understood what PDO or PGI meant. So we gave them a set of true and false statements surrounding the logos and asked them to distinguish what was correct and what was incorrect. And they found this very difficult to do. So only a tiny, tiny percentage of consumers could actually do that. Now, because consumers have a limited understanding of PDO and PGI, they find it difficult to make judgments about the trustworthiness of the label and also how attractive it is. Now, you may be asking, well, is this a problem which is generic to all food labels? Do consumers just not understand food labels and logos? So what we did is we compared our results for PDO and PGI logos against selected national food quality labels. So some of those were organic, in other cases they were GI labels. And what we found is that the national labels had substantially higher levels of recognition and trust. And because of that, consumers paid much more attention to them when grocery shopping. So what's really important to bear in mind is that just because a product achieves PDO or PGI status, and they are able to put the PDO and PGI logo on their products, that doesn't necessarily mean that their market performance will inevitably increase. And for particular GIs, they may benefit more from their own branding efforts, as well as national and retailer labeling, rather than the PDO and PGI logos per se. In terms of rural development, we see some positive results. So GIs compared against reference products create more employment, more jobs, and also better paid jobs compared to reference products, and they also have higher local multiplier effects. This is because production cannot be outsourced beyond the geographical territory of the protected GI. So production cannot move to the lowest cost producers. So it's a way of retaining jobs and revenue within a particular local area. And GIs may also produce some public goods which benefit local citizens and consumers worldwide. It's important to note that GIs, as we said earlier, are a very mixed bag. So they come in lots of different shapes and sizes. And the contribution to rural development of the nascent or the emerging GIs is often more mixed. So, for example, if we look at the 2004 and 2007 new member states of the European Union, most of those are from Central and Eastern Europe. And those countries during the socialist era and the immediate socialist, post-socialist era didn't have a system of GIs. But since gaining EU membership, they have registered a fairly large number of PDO and PGI products. Now, some of those have been successful. So they are giving benefits to members, higher returns, they're attracting new members to the consortia. But some, however, have had disappointing results. So they haven't generated the revenues and the impact which was desired. I think we can learn 4 lessons from some of those registration processes. So the first lesson is it's very important to develop a business and marketing plan to accompany the registration process. So one danger is that registration becomes a purely administrative process about setting the code of practice, about agreeing the nature of what's going to go into it, rather than thinking about how the benefits of the product is going to be communicated to consumers, how marketing channels are going to be developed. And that's really important. Now, 2 positive side effects of a registration process can be, first of all, it makes farmers more confident and have greater pride in their products, just thinking about what they produce and what's special about them. And also, by building a consortia, it can help bring producers together to think about the common problems which they face and what may be some common solutions. So it's a way of instituting some cooperative action which goes beyond the pure formalities of the GI. Finally, one pitfall to bear in mind is that forming the consortium can be more tricky where the constituent members vary enormously in size. So, for example, if we have a consortium which includes a small number of large producers and then large numbers of small producers, what often happens is that large producers would like the code of practice to embody the industrial practices which they typically use. And that may be in conflict with the smaller scale producers who would like to see a more artisan code of practice emerge. And what we've seen through cases over time in Europe is often the larger producers will have greater influence, and so the GI may embody more industrial practices to the annoyance of the more small-scale artisan producers. So I'm going to stop there, and I hope you found that the presentation is interesting, and I'm happy to discuss the issues with you later on. Thank you.
Great, thank you, Matthew, and a great overview of GIs and some of the real benefits of them, and also I think it's great to show that balanced approach as well. So thank you for that. And when I'm thinking about it and trying to understand, how it's applicable here. I'm wondering if you could shed a little bit of light on maybe the structure of some of these GIs. How do these producers come together? Is there a formal, a cooperative type agreement, or how do they just structure that so that they do try to work effectively together?
Thanks, Peter. That's a good question. It varies enormously. So in some cases, there may be an existing cooperative or producer association, which forms the basis of the application. In other cases, it's something which is created anew. In some cases, the initiative has been producer-led, so producers have wanted to do it and they've took it forward. In other cases, it may be that ministries or other government bodies have suggested to producers and consortia that it's something which they ought to apply for. So we see a varying different structures, and as I said in the presentation, some may have 50, 100, 150 members, others may have 2 or 3 members. In some cases, although the spirit of geographical indications is that there's multiple producers which have the GI. In some cases, the GI has been awarded to a single producer.
All right, thank you, Matthew, for that explanation. And I think that it's interesting. And once we get into the discussion room, I got a few more questions for you, because I think it'd be interesting for people in Atlantic Canada or different parts of Canada to look at some of the specific ones that would be related, similar to them, either in size or category or that type of thing. So thanks very much for joining us from the UK today, and look forward to joining you in the discussion afterwards as well. And our next speaker will be Marcia Cadogan. And Marcia's going to share some insights into the concept of geographical indications from the Canadian perspective. And Marcia Cadogan is an expert in international intellectual property rights law and trade, innovation and technology licensing. She's a practicing lawyer, has a PhD focused on intellectual property, and also has a background in researching, teaching, and consulting in the area of global geographical indication laws and its uses. So I'd like to introduce Marcia Cadogan, and we look forward to learning about it from a Canadian perspective.
Peter, thank you. It's good to be here to be part of this discussion. I'll talk there's so much to cover, but I'll focus on a few things very briefly. In terms of today, I'll talk about what the Trademarks Act says about geographical indications, also the possibilities of its use within the Atlantic region, and also the importance of having a geographical indication strategy. There's a lot to cover here, so for today I'll just focus on choice of product and also the composition or who should be involved in the producer groups, because this has an impact on how successful or effective the geographical indication scheme can be. And then in terms of commercialization of the food product, what are the prospects of actually entering other markets successfully, especially if it's not a jurisdiction where geographical indications is not recognized on the same level as Canada or the EU. Now, the Trademarks Act was amended very recently to incorporate provisions on food and agricultural-based geographical indications. So before this, what was protected was wine and spirits, but now what can be registrable in addition to wines and spirits are food products and agricultural products, as long as the quality, characteristics, or reputation of the product are essentially attributable to the area, the region. So in this case, we're focusing on Atlantic Canada. Characteristics or reputation or quality that's essentially attributable to an area in that region. Now I'll talk about, there's so much to cover under the Act, but for today I'll just focus on two issues that may pose a problem. For example, there may be a name that a producer group would like to be registered as a geographical indication, but what has to be considered and what we have to ensure is that there is no likelihood of confusion between the prospective geographical indication name and an existing trademark or a pending trademark. So you'll find, therefore, that if the name is already being used as a trademark, meaning it's registered, or sometimes unregistered trademarks do have significance as well, then you may have a problem. And this is more of a problem for producer groups or for food products that are newly entering the market as a geographical indication, because one of the factors that the registrar of trademarks and also the Canadian Intellectual Property Office will focus on is how long the indication, not the product, because the product may have been around for generations or years, but how long that indication has been associated with the product. So if you were to compare the length of time the trademark has been associated with the food, and compare that with how long the food or agri-product has been associated with the geographical indications, and the latter falls short in terms of duration, and there's a likelihood that consumers either within Atlantic Canada or Canada will be confused by the existence of both the indication and the trademark in terms of their name in consumer markets, then it is very likely that there will be no registration. The other thing is, since CETA, and CETA meaning the free trade agreement between Canada and the EU, which allowed and facilitated the amendment of the Trademark Act, so our approach now to food and agricultural products as geographical indications bears a lot of similarity to the EU regulation that was spoken of previously, but there are differences. Now, if we look at point B, once the Canadian Intellectual Property Office receives all the information and publishes the indication for opposition by a competitor or an interested party, and say it goes through registration and it's registered, it still can be challenged. And this is different because in the EU, if you look at the EU regulation, although generic names, meaning a name that is in common use, cannot be registered as a geographical indication, once the food is or agricultural product is registered as a geographical indication, it cannot be cancelled on the basis of being generic. And you can also see this being solidified in the international agreement or international law of GIs. There's this treaty that came into effect in February, the Lisbon Agreement on geographical indications and appellations of origin, that says the same thing. But under the Trademarks Act, it can still be attacked. So in terms of how indefinite protection is, it is not indefinite under the Trademarks Act. So I'll leave it there for now, and I look forward to your comments or questions in regards to this, either after I talk or in the breakout room. Now, in terms of the products that may be registrable, as long as I would recommend a strong linkage, because what happens a lot of times is there is a loose association between the product, the legislation, and the place. When this happens, it is very easy for the registration to be opposed, either during the stages of registration or even once it is registered. It is also then easier for infringement claims to proceed and to be successful. So, in terms of within Nova Scotia, Prince Edward Island, and New Brunswick, is there a possibility for wild blueberries? Again, it boils down to the stakeholders that are involved. Research can be done as well in terms of scientific research to find out which areas would be most conducive to have such a registration being applied to. And also in terms of Newfoundland, is there a possibility for products such as iceberg vodka or the Labrador tea? Now, these are very well-known examples. Again, a lot of research has to be done to find out if this is in fact feasible. And then the feasibility of it comes about from different perspectives as well. It's not just the intellectual property aspects, but we got to look at the local dynamics as well. Now, having said that, it's really important to have, I've written about is a geographical indication strategy. And it's really is an approach that is inclusive, that is participatory, that encourages an outlook and a perspective that has an eye not just on the local market or even the regional market. So not just Atlantic Canada, but Canada and worldwide. You're going beyond the registrability and the registration of the geographical indication to consider the stakeholders that are involved, the possibility of more public-private partnerships, and also creating linkages that look towards sustainable development goals. And again, in terms of narrowing what I've just said, this is why the choice of product is extremely important. I've been doing a lot of research on this for years. I researched one particular jurisdiction, and a particular set of producers were very much interested in the notion of an geographical indications, but these were really small, very small scale producers, and the product did not have a very long shelf life. So even if it were to be exported to other markets, it wouldn't make much sense in terms of the marketing strategy that would be involved, or whether or not there would be sustainable consumer demand for the product. So choice of product, there has to be a high level of demand for the product. It's best for there to be more an international focus. So is there a demand or consumer demand for the product in overseas markets? Is there also a geographical indication protection on the same or even at a higher level for the food or agricultural product in that market? And also the price point as well. Is there a profit margin that can be, a great or good profit margin that can be obtained from the commercialization of the product? That's one issue. The other thing is, the code of practice or the product specification. One of the elements of the product specification is how will you decide on which area within, say, Prince Edward Island is best to be designated as the area for say, example, wild blueberries. Now, this is very important, and it can lead to contentions. If we look at the recent basmati rice dispute, which is still ongoing between Pakistan and India, a part of the issue has to do with the delimited area, because in India, basmati rice, the name is a geographical indication, but it can only be used by farmers who are growing the rice in the northern section of India. And also, but in Pakistan, there's also an area that where the rice is grown and the term basmati is used, and both of these countries export rice to the EU. Pakistan is opposing the registration of the name basmati by India, and I'm sure one of these grounds will be, okay, you're not the only one entitled to use the name. It's not just the northern region of India that the rice can be cultivated. Now, another issue to bear in mind is if the code of practice is very loose, so it's not very, it's not very cohesive, then you may find that there may be opposition or challenge during the registration stages at the Intellectual Property Office here in Canada. Another thing to bear in mind towards, is the composition of the producer group. Based on, I've been looking at this for years, the more inclusive and participatory the group is, the greater is the likelihood of, a more collaborative approach. The greater are the likelihood that the regulations that are being used in the development of the geographical indications, so the regulations and the policies that govern the cultivation, manufacturing, distribution, marketing of the food, creating that linkage between the food and all the sectors or cross sectors in the economy can be realized. Now, I recommend that the producer groups not only be composed, or the collectives be not just composed of the farmers and the distributors, but also some type of public partnership needs to be a part of it as well. And these can inform innovation and rural development initiatives, which, it's always easier said than done. But the more collaborative the approach and the more inclusive it is, then the greater the chances that you may have job creation within the specific areas. So it could be the Atlantic region. The more likely will be an innovative approach to geographical indication. So there is interest. So for example, you're manufacturing the food, and the producer is interested in applying for a geographical indication, but what about the prospects of a spillover effect on the market? What are the possibilities of starting a spillover industry, especially in the age where we not only have to be innovative in our approaches, but also think about environmental considerations as well. So can biofuel be produced by the waste material that comes about from food production? The broader our approach is to a geographical indication strategy in terms of food, the more likely, if there's to be any success, that success will be realized. My last point has to do with, you've registered your food as a geographical indication. We all know that registration alone of any type of intellectual property gets you nowhere. There's no benefit. You can say you own it, but then is it giving you any economic or social or any other benefit? It has to be commercialized. It has to be managed. Now, one of these is you want to ensure that your food GI is protected in overseas markets. If you're looking at the EU, then once you get to the stage where it goes through the registration process and the registration process is successful, then you know that your product is protected. If it is infringed, you have a case to be met. Other jurisdictions may be different. So, for example, in the UK, we know that Canada recently signed an agreement with the UK, and so the CETA provisions on geographical indications are very similar. So there is no real concern there. If your market is China, for example, so you have your registration and you're interested in exporting your product, it could be iceberg vodka or blueberries to China. In China there are 3 different legislation or under which geographical indications can be registered. Now, the EU recently signed an agreement with China for the protection of geographical indications. So it's not the EU, so yes, the EU and China. Outside of that, it's somewhat difficult for other countries that don't have such similar bilateral agreements to obtain geographical indication protection under the same level. It would probably more than likely be registered as a certification mark, which is similar to a trademark or a collective mark. The downside of this is that you're protected if someone were to say, call your product by the same name and say it is from that specific jurisdiction when in fact it's not, or for unfair competition basis, but not if they were to use terms such as iceberg vodka imitation of, or a style of this, or a kind of that. The other 2 basis of protection in China seems to be more focused on the domestic Chinese market. So that's something to look into. In Japan, there is extensive protection for geographical indications. It's foods, it's agricultural products, and it's also other types of non-food products as well as in India. But the thing to note is registration gets you to one specific point. Then you have to think about maintaining that registration. And also, if the producer group is interested in innovation and sustainable development goals and having those be at forefront, a lot more considerations need to be taken into account. I'll leave it there for now, but I do welcome your questions and comments after. Thank you.
Thank you, Marcia. That's what a great summary. And it's definitely, it's a complicated topic. It's not something that's simple that we could just jump into. And one question I had, and it stems a little bit from Matthew's presentation as well, when producers and processors hear, oh, you could get a better rate of return, or that there's an opportunity for you to be more profitable if you choose to go down this route. I just wonder if you have any advice for producers and processors in Canada with regards to that. If I put my sort of retailer hat on and think of producers and processors getting together and getting a better return, I start to say, hey, what's going on? So do you have any advice for groups who are thinking about that from a pricing perspective?
So it depends on the product as well. If you're already getting a good price in the market for the product, then there is a possibility for, if I think about products that are already doing well in the space, even before they considered such a association, then it may work, right? So if your profit margin is already good, then fine. But the most important thing right now, if the price is already right, is will all these people work together? Can they work together? Right. So if the scheme or the collective is comprised of small scale persons, so more artisan based, and then others at the higher end of the chain, and the stakeholders at the higher end of the chain have more say in terms of the regulation or the policies that are being used in the collective, in the specific food collective, you may find that there's a loggerhead, something that develops, right? And also there are membership fees to think about. So there's also other ways of making money, right? But the price point is just one aspect.
Right. Okay, great. And I'm sure there will be people who have questions for you afterwards. So thank you. And also, I noticed you had your website on the bottom of your slides. And for people, there's Marcia's website is a great resource of content. I definitely went there myself and looked at some of the great articles that she's written about this topic. So I would encourage people, if you're interested, to visit and check that out as well. So thank you very much, Marcia. So our final speaker today is Marta Middlebrough. And Marta is a trade counselor at the Delegation of European Union to Canada. Her work focuses on the implementation of the Canada-EU Comprehensive Economic and Trade Agreement, which we've already heard referenced as CETA. Prior to this diplomatic posting, she's worked for over a decade at the European Commission's Trade Negotiation Department, covering topics ranging from China to the EU's trade strategy. Marta holds degrees in economics and international relations from Oxford University. So welcome, Marta. Oh, you're muted.
Yeah, we were saying that this was going to happen. So yes, I am officially the one person in the webinar that has to have their mic muted at some point. So,
all good now.
Thanks, Peter, and thank you very much to everybody who's tuned in to this webinar. So at this point, I think that I have the unenviable task of trying to conclude on the presentation portion of our webinar today. And coming after such wonderful speakers as Matthew and Marcia, this is no mean feat. So what I'm going to try and do is to pick up on some of the themes that they've already explored. And if you allow me, I think I'm just going to sort of take it back to basics and perhaps paraphrase a little bit too crudely as to what's in it for you. If you are watching us today and you are either a policymaker or you are an agricultural producer in Atlantic Canada, why should you be bothered about exploring potentially getting a registration, a GI registration for your product, or looking at how to include GIs in your agricultural policy? So Matthew and Marcia have pretty much done the work. So Matthew has already taken you through the system in the EU, and what I found really, really interesting was he's shown you some of the evidence of what GIs can do, both in terms of the marketing of your product, but perhaps more importantly, what it can do for rural development and sustainable development. And then Marcia followed on with showing you how the trademarks registration system and the GI system works in Canada, and also talked about how important it is to have a GI if you want to also get established on an international market. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to add a sort of a third layer to this, and build up on what Marcia has talked about in terms of international markets, and tell you a little bit more about what role do GIs play in international agreements, and why do we try to put GIs and GI protection in international agreements. So we've already mentioned CETA, which stands for EU-Canada Comprehensive Economic and Trade Agreement, CETA in short, which is the free trade agreement between EU and Canada, which has been in application since September 2017. And CETA, importantly, also has a whole chapter on geographical indications and the protection of geographical indications on both sides of the Atlantic. Now, the European Union always tries to put protection of GIs in its trade agreements, and the one with Canada, so CETA was no exception. And the reason why we try to explore what we can do together with our international partners in the area of GIs in our trade agreements is that we have seen on the European experience that GIs can really help you as a producer export more successfully to international markets. So what that in turn does for a trade agreement and a success of trade agreement as a whole is that we see that a GI protected product has better success in exporting and in international markets, which brings better benefits of a trade agreement to the agricultural community, which is one of our goals. It also increases consumer confidence, and therefore it brings more benefits from trade agreements to the consumers, which again is one of the goals of trade agreements. Now, I'm going to throw just one bit of statistics at you to sort of illustrate this point, and that is that while GIs and GI protected products in Europe, they make up roughly 7% of our overall agricultural production in Europe. That is magnified when you look at what the European Union exports to other markets. And GIs actually make 15% of all European agricultural exports. So we really see that role that GIs can play as part of your marketing and branding and consumer recognition. And here I'm going to take it back to a point that both Matthew and Marcia stressed, and which I think is paramount and it's very, very important. GIs should always be accompanied by a strong marketing plan and a business plan. It can be something that can help you sort of augment your brand and bring that little bit of extra, both domestically and when it comes to exporting. But it can only be successful if it is done as part of a more comprehensive plan on your part. Now, we, from the, let's say, sort of the government trade negotiation point of view, we are trying to do our part by bringing about a framework and a protection framework for GIs within our trade exchanges across the Atlantic. And at the same time, we are excited to see what the agricultural producers and the policy specialists domestically might want to do with that framework, taking those GIs and hopefully sort of catapulting them into the international space. So I'm conscious of the time, so I'm going to stop here, and I'm very, very interested to hear from you about your particular situation on the market, your particular ideas about any products in Atlantic Canada that perhaps you would like to have registered as a GI, or that you think have potential in exchanges with the European Union, and very much looking forward to our discussions. Thank you, Peter.
Thanks very much, Marta. And I agree. I would agree as well from my background that strong marketing and business case strategy is so important to this. That just having a claim doesn't do it in today's marketplace. There are so many claims out there that you really do need to accompany that with that strong marketing strategy. I thought it was a great point you made about the fact that 7% of production, but 15% when it comes to the export side. So one question I would have regarding that is, would you see that for producers and processors in, say, Atlantic Canada, that it should be people who are a little more focused on export markets? Or do you think that, I mean, you're here in Canada, you're working here in Canada now, do you see that there's also the potential for the domestic side?
So, I mean, I would say that they go together. You know, I think that what we see is the tendency among consumers, both in Canada and in the EU, to look for products where they can be more confident about the origin, they can be more confident about what goes into making them, and therefore what is it that they're eating themselves. So I think that from a point of view of an agricultural business, if you're going to go for it, and if you're going to put the effort into registering a GI, it would probably make better sense to not close yourself off to opportunities and say, okay, I'm only going to do it domestically, or I'm only going to go and do it for my export, but really to be open to both, to try to have a sort of an open business plan that allows you for both. I would just say that what we have seen in Europe is that, generally speaking, for GI holders, it seems that sort of a breaking into a foreign market is just that much easier.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think that's really interesting. And one of the things which we've been focusing on here at Skew Food is just the fact that, as challenging as 2020 has been, one of the benefits of this difficult year is I believe consumers are more interested in their food. They're more interested in where their food is coming from and just how it's produced. So I think this is one other way to help tell that story and cement your position in the market. So thank you. Thank you very much for joining us today. And I agree, I'm sure there will be lots of questions for you in the discussion area, and with your knowledge of trade, I think that will be a great asset to people asking some of those questions. So thank you for being here with us.
Thank you, Peter.
So that concludes our the three sort of speakers that we had lined up for you today. I want to say a big thank you to Food and Beverage Atlantic and the European Union for bringing you these sessions, and also invite you to our follow-up session next week on January 27th, when we're going to really look at some practical real-life examples. And I really look forward to that session, to learning more about some practical sessions. So really encourage you to register for that session next week. And also, as we mentioned before, we're going to have a discussion room. So if you, it's the link to the discussion room is in that discussion tab. So if you want to just click on that, and then that will take you to our discussion room. We're going to all be in one room. Originally, we had talked about maybe looking at two, but we're all going to be together, so you can ask questions, and everybody will be able to listen to all of the answers from our really knowledgeable speakers. So really want to invite you to join us in that discussion room. So just click on that discussion tab, and we look forward to seeing you there. So thank you very much for joining us today, and really excited about learning more about this opportunity of geographical indications.